Hi, I'm Spencer Ziegler.
Hi, and I'm Mellisa Smith, and welcome to Data Lit, a podcast for educators by educators. So when we think of data related to students, we often go directly to achievement data, but have you ever wondered about what behavior data is available?
Yeah, that's been on my mind. I feel like there's a puzzle with only like half the pieces there when it comes to that piece of educational data.
For me, when I think about behavior data, what comes to mind is either discipline or suspension data, but those sort of feel like an after the fact, like after something has happened, like autopsy data. But what if we can get behavior data that gives us a pulse of the social needs of our schools so that we can do something ahead of time? And so in today's episode of Data Lit, we are joined by two district experts who will help us explore a tool called the BIMAS 2, or BIMAS for short, which is used in our district to proactively look at the behavioral health of our schools. To provide us with an overview of the BIMAS, we have with us Mary Whitehouse, who is the lead psychologist, as well as the Wake County School District's coordinator for BIMAS. Mary, welcome.
Thanks, y'all. It's good to be here.
We are so grateful for you for joining us today. So can you kind of give us a broad overview of this BIMAS assessment?
Sure. Broadly speaking, BIMAS is the district's universal screener for behavior and social emotional learning. And so what we are trying to do is to get data on as many students as possible to get a sense of how are we doing instructionally, both with behavior and with social emotional learning, and how are we doing in terms of identifying and supporting students who might need something more than what they're getting in the classroom. We know that we provide a lot of really good instruction, but we also know that the things that we do in the classroom are not going to fit the needs of every student that comes in our space.
I guess I'm so slightly surprised that you said that the BIMAS, one of the focus is how are we doing instructionally, because you wouldn't think about a social emotional tool, or do we teach, like it's not like we have lessons per se on social emotional learning. So I find that kind of fascinating that that's a lens in which the BIMAS is kind of looking at how we're doing, like the health of our classroom or the health of our instruction.
Right. And when you think about what are we doing as a school community around behavior in terms of establishing expectations, or setting up our classroom norms, how is that working out? And this can give us some data to look at those kinds of things. And as our schools continue to use Second Step as our social emotional learning curriculum, it can give us some data around that as well, because you can look at the data that you get back from BIMAS in terms of behaviors, but then you can also look at it in terms of those social emotional competencies.
I like that. I feel like a lot of the, history of education in the last few decades is just transitioning from the fixed mindset to the growth mindset, and we just keep adding layers which we apply that. We started to kind of get that about, like, say, reading skills or something, but that applies also to, behaviors that these students are not, it's not cemented, it's not fate, that we can teach, we can give feedback, and we kind of improve in all these areas.
Right. And so much of it really is, what are the skills that we need to develop? And that's not just true of our students, that's true of everybody. We want the people that we work with. We want the people that we're in community with. We want the people that we're in relationship with to have those skills as well. But where do we learn them?
Yeah. I think that is swirling in my head right now, that typically when you think of school teacher instruction, I'm not thinking that those other skills are places and spaces where our kiddos are learning those things.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into the logistics. Like, I know for me that I've heard BIMAS a lot, but I couldn't tell you much about just what it looks like in terms of administration. So we have a few questions just about how is this administered? We can kind of walk through and chat as we go. So first, just, I guess, so who gives it? Who's administering this assessment?
It's less about who's administering it and more about who's completing it.
Ooh, okay.
Right now, what we are using is the teacher report form. So there's a teacher version of the BIMAS, there's a parent version, and then there's a student version for 7th grade and up. Right now, we're only implementing the teacher version with plans to expand to those other versions in the future.
Interesting.
Oh, nice.
So teachers log in. This is not an assessment that they do directly with students. This is not an interview with students. This is, I'm going to log on to the BIMAS app in the Wake ID portal and pull up my list of students and start screening. And I just go through one at a time. All the questions for this student, how many times over the course of the past week did I see these behaviors? So there's 34 questions that teachers are responding to, and there's a key that gives how often is rarely, how often is sometimes.
Okay.
Nice.
How often is often.
Yeah.
So that teachers have a sense of, I only saw that 2 or 3 times, so that would equate to this. And it is a snapshot. So it's really just over the course of the past week. And sometimes, you know, students have a really great week that perhaps is not typical for them. And sometimes students will have a bad week that's not typical for them. We're all entitled to that.
Yeah.
But so it really depends on when the teacher is doing the form as to how consistent the results are with what's typical for that student. So teachers are the ones completing it, and it takes about 3 to 4 minutes per student once they get going. They don't have to do all at once. They can submit one and move on to something else, or they can stop in the middle of one and save it and come back to it. And every teacher that I've gotten feedback from has said it was easier than I thought it would be, and it took way less time than I thought it would take, which was great news. That's what you
want to hear. Yeah.
Absolutely. We want it to be very easy for teachers to complete.
Yeah. And so teachers are the ones that are completing it. At elementary school, that's a little bit more straightforward, I would imagine, because students are typically paired with one major teacher, you know, apart from departmentalizing. But as they get into secondary, then which teachers are the ones that are completing it?
Typically, their second period teacher is the one to complete it. There's variability. Some schools, especially if they're on an A-Day, B-Day schedule, that gets complicated. High school gets complicated for lots of reasons. But usually their second period teacher, or if there's an advisory or a homeroom teacher that kids are spending consistent time with, that might potentially know the students better or see them more regularly, that's going to be the teacher. So whoever's on their roster for that class period, that's who they get.
But I guess the guidance is around, it has to be somebody who knows the kids and spends significant time with the students, right?
In theory, yes, right. So teachers should have those students for at least 4 weeks in their classroom. And then recognizing that at the secondary level, you have just a portion of the day with those students.
Right.
And so ideally what happens is when the data come back, teachers are looking at that and saying, that's interesting that student shows up this way in your class, because in my class, I see different behaviors or whatever, right? There's some similarities and differences depending on the setting, potentially.
Yeah, that's cool because, I mean, conversations like that have always taken place, but they haven't always been based on data. So I like that this gives you a common instrument. So it's not just my gut or perhaps my biases that are kind of contributing to those conversations. There's something behind it. So I like that. Yeah. Okay, so that's who's giving it. So now who takes it? Because right now we're in a cohort model with schools. Is that correct?
Right. By the end of this year, all of the schools, except the ones that just opened this year, will have teachers completing the form.
Okay.
Right. So we are well into implementation with the teacher form. And like I said, we'll start expanding to the parent and student form in the future.
That's interesting. And all of our students?
The schools that will come on board this year will get to choose a grade level or 2 to pilot with in the spring. But then by next fall, it would be all of our students.
Okay. And then the other question, this little logistical corner, is like how often? Like, are there windows for this?
There are windows for this. So there's a fall window and a spring window. And it usually coincides with the end of the first quarter and mid-late or early mid-third quarter, just so folks have time, 1, to get to know their students at the beginning of the year, and then 2, to be able to have some time to respond to the data, whatever comes back, because we want to make sure that we're being responsible with the data that we're getting.
I like that piece about it, that it's not just about giving an assessment and getting data, but there is expectation that once you get the data, how are we responding to that as well?
Mm.
When you were talking about the assessment, you mentioned that there were 34 items. I think I've read that the assessment is made up of, they call them change sensitive items. Can you tell me what does that mean? And, what are some of the questions being asked?
Sure. Some of the questions that are being asked are things like, how often, again, in the course of the past week, did you observe this student to follow directions, maintain friendships, work out conflicts with others, appear sad, appeared worried, get angry, get sent to an authority for discipline, just be able to pay attention, act impulsively. So there's a lot of different behaviors across 5 categories that are included. So those are the types of questions that are being asked. And then what was the other part of your question?
Did they describe it as change sensitive?
Yes. So these are behaviors that could change from day to day, hour to hour, week to week. But what's nice is because they're so sensitive to change over time, we can also use the BIMAS as a progress monitoring tool.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Same questions.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting with this compared to some of the other screeners that we have. You need to bring something else for the progress monitoring typically, but as a result, this can serve multiple purposes.
And I do like the part that they're identifying the nature of what you're trying to measure, right? That it is something that is not static, right? I mean, that's while you're looking over a week's worth of time, again, behaviors, minute to minute, emotions and behaviors can change. So I like that.
Okay, so then from this, we're getting quite a bit of data. How is this data used at, let's say, the district level?
I use it to see where are places that schools might need some additional support and start to make those connections for folks at and above my pay grade to help with resource allocation. After every screening window, I will run the data for the whole district, both in terms of every student that we screened and then by level, so elementary, middle, and high. But then I will also break that down by superintendent region and say, so here's all the elementary schools in Central Region. Here's all the middle schools. Here's all the high schools, so that you can look regionally too to see what are you noticing in the data and what patterns have you observed. I'm also a data nerd, so I will get into the weeds sometimes with some of the data and have other spreadsheets that some people might care about and most people don't, and that's okay.
Yeah, because the data, as we understand it, there's a portal through the Wake ID portal, and you can kind of access there, but you can also export so that you can kind of put it alongside other data sources. Is that correct?
Yes. And that's part of the training for schools is this is one data piece. It is a snapshot in time, and we don't ever want to make a decision about a student based on one piece of data. So what other data might be helpful for determining whether there truly is a concern that might need to be addressed or not? Because again, sometimes we have a moment or a bad week and that's not typical. And so maybe it's not something that needs to be addressed, or maybe it is, or maybe it's already being addressed through some type of behavior plan or an IEP or a 504 plan or attendance plan or whatever intervention is in place.
One question, I guess, that I'd like to hear a little bit about is what do you recommend for schools? What are some of the recommendations or practices for schools when they are getting ready to look at the BIMAS? What's some of that messaging for schools that you guys share?
I will remind schools to consider their data at multiple levels. So school-wide, are there trends that you're noticing? Then within each grade level, are there trends that you're seeing? Then within each classroom, are there trends that you're seeing before you ever get to the student individually? A lot of times we really want to jump to individual students. But I think, again, getting back to what are the skills that kids need to learn and how are we doing at teaching them? Where are they learning those skills? And it's fascinating when you start breaking down your data that way of looking at okay, so I have this grade level that looks like it might be a little bit of a hot spot. Now let me look at the individual classrooms. Oh, this classroom is dramatically different from these others.
Yeah.
And what's going on there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not going to tell you everything, but it can point you to there's something here that needs to be investigated. And sometimes you get into that and you're like, there's a lot of social skills that are lacking in this kindergarten classroom. But then when we start looking at the individual students, there's some different reasons for that.
Mhm.
And some of it has absolutely nothing to do with missing skills. Some of it's just the temperament and the personality of the kid. They're not going to raise their hand and talk in a big group, but they have friends. They'll talk to each other. They're communicating with the teacher. Like there's no real concern about social skills in that instance. So then we move on. Whereas in other spaces, there might truly be some concerns about certain skills that do need to be addressed.
I think I like that. So as you think about, everything that has been shared today, what is like one thing you want like our listeners to know about the BIMAS?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. I think I want people to know that it is a useful tool,
Mhm.
and it's not the only way we should consider students' behavior. But I want them to also think about the fact that so much of our behavior data is reactive. It lets us know that a problem has already occurred. So if you've got a minor behavior incident or a major behavior incident or a suspension, the problem has already happened.
Right.
BIMAS can help us figure out if there's something that we can do on the front end to prevent something from becoming a bigger problem, which is what we want for all of our kids as well.
Yeah. I definitely do like that about, in what ways can we be proactive? Because so much of the data that we get, we are then reacting to it. But if this can give us a kind of window into, hey, you might want to take a closer look at something is happening. And then we can put things in place to kind of prevent something major, like you said, majorly happening. I think folks, that would, it allows you to use resources in a whole different way.
Yes.
Can be more efficient in the long end.
And for this next part, we're thrilled to be joined by Gina Montague, a counselor at Bowling Road Elementary and previously at Powell, to share a school-based perspective. Gina, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit about how the BIMAS 2 is used at the school level?
Sure. So the BIMAS 2 should be looked at by a team of people at the school level that are ideally trained in how it is given to teachers and what the results can provide. But basically, we look at the BIMAS and the results as a school-wide picture of where we're at in different social emotional competencies and some other factors that contribute to academic achievement, like cognitive attention, social functioning, that kind of thing.
So you mentioned a team. So what are some of the other types of staff that might be on this team alongside counselors?
Sure. So yes, usually the school counselor, typically the school psychologist, an administrator would be ideal. And then the most important people, I feel like, are the classroom teachers on the team, because they're actually with the students all day, every day and interfacing. And they're the ones that are answering the BIMAS questions as well to give us the results that we're analyzing.
So when you're analyzing as a team and looking collectively at school results, or are you looking at an individual student?
So we do a little bit of both. I would say that it's important to start with big picture. So we look at the school-wide results, and the school, you can break it down by school-wide, what percentage of students are at risk or close to being at risk, or are kind of that green tier 1 level in self-awareness or in academic functioning or conduct. And so we look at how those compare. You can also break it down by grade level, which is something that I've done frequently with the team before. And you can break it down by subgroup, which is helpful when you're looking at other data sources to kind of cross-check what pictures the data are giving you for different subgroups in the school.
I'm glad that you mentioned other data, because knowing that one data source cannot give you like the entire picture. What is some other data that you guys look at alongside this data?
Sure. So I think that no data source should be looked at in isolation. So we would ideally look at any data we have. So that could be behavior referrals, attendance, even academic achievement. As a counselor, I take my own data so I can look at counseling referrals, which is helpful to look at in combination with the social emotional competencies. Are the students I'm seeing frequently also at risk in a lot of social emotional areas, that kind of thing. So we might look at if we have high behavior referrals in a category like physical aggression, and we also have a lot of low self-management scores, a lot of students at risk in that area. Do we need to put in some strategies to help students learn better self-control at the core level, not just at the individual level, things like that?
It's fascinating to hear it's the same basic approach that we might take to, other screeners that we think of academic. And that's just a reminder that, good data literacy is good data literacy, just regardless of which skills it's kind of measuring. And also, hearing your response makes me think of, I guess, the importance of that team that you reference, kind of cutting across those categories, because I can see how different people might put different data alongside it based on what their end goal is.
What is your take, or how, in your experience, including parents as part of that team, right? Where, it looks as though there's a report that could be sent to parents. So how do you guys bridge that information with parents or include them in that analysis or whatever support that they can provide?
So I feel like there's two parts to this. The first part is having them as part of the team. So if you're looking, for example, at a bunch of data in SIT, let's say, on your school improvement team, ideally you would have at least one parent representative on your school improvement team, maybe even more. And if you're only looking, I think that if you're looking at some data, the BIMAS kind of feeds into everything. It overlaps with a lot of stuff. It can contribute to a lot of different things, if that makes sense. So hopefully the parents would get to have a voice on that team. And the second thing is, I have had parents before, because they get an opt-out letter. So parents ask questions about the screener, and some parents want to see and know their child's results. And I don't see anything wrong with that, because they're a big piece of the puzzle too, right? We want to collaborate with them on what their child's strengths are and what their child's needs are. So I usually will send that or share that with parents that request it. That's just been my experience at the school level.
Seeing their own child's results, you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really helpful, because I think, with all of the information that parents typically get about their students, a lot of it tends to be around academic. But, we know that there is a growing focus on the social emotional learning. And so to have some other data that can kind of help a parent support that seems to be really helpful.
Right. And I will say that whenever I've shown parents social emotional data, they're always very, I don't know the word for it. They're really happy to see it, not necessarily happy with the results, but they're glad to, it's insightful for them. It gives them, they're like, oh, we didn't know that this was how, that you guys looked at this, or that you're even trying to strengthen these skills in our children, or we didn't know that this area was an area of need, and this, it looks like we're really solid in this area. So they're pleased to have that insight from data like this.
I bet.
Yeah, turn something that is abstract and you might have a feeling about, and it gives you something tangible that you can put alongside other data, be it school data or data that the parents have access to kind of figure out how to support the kids. That's cool.
I think you mentioned this sort of notion where, again, you're talking about strengths of students. And so anytime information, I think, is presented to parents where you're talking about the strengths of their students, and then, what areas need to be improved, is always helpful, because, as a parent, you never just want to hear your child needs this fixed, right? So there's something wrong with your child. So the fact that it allows for that sort of language and lifting up students as both, right? They have strengths. We all have strengths and weaknesses, I think, is also helpful.
And that's one thing I like about the BIMAS is it doesn't just give you those kids that are in the red area, the tier 3, like at risk, red light area. They're in almost every category. I think it is every category. They give you the amount of students that have strengths in that area. And so there's like it's by color. So red, yellow, light green, but then the dark green means that not only are they competent and they're like at the normal level, but they actually have a strength in that area. So that's helpful to look at as a team too, even at the school level, just saying, look how many kids we have that have a strength in relationship skills. Clearly their friendships are solid. It may be some of the other things we need to work on, but highlighting the strengths I think is super important too. I agree.
And I imagine a teacher can use that kind of information as well for like grouping kids, because we ask kids to collaborate and work together. So I imagine that information is also insightful when you're thinking about, who can work well with each other.
Exactly. Yes. And the teachers can all see their classes results from the BIMAS, and they can strategically kind of move kids around and try to facilitate some skill building, even just with the students.
Yeah.
And what does that data look like? Is this in a platform? Are you exporting? Are they working with kind of spreadsheets? What are the options for that data analysis?
Sure. So it starts in a platform and it's very user-friendly, at least I think it is. And in the platform, you can see results. It's split into kind of 2 sections. There's a standard section, which has the categories of conduct, negative affect, cognitive attention, social functioning, and academic functioning. And then you can see the social emotional learning as a separate one. And then you can see the social emotional learning competencies, which there's 5 of them: self-awareness, responsible decision-making, that kind of thing. And you can do a lot of things in that platform. You can see, like I said, school-wide or class-wide. If you're a classroom teacher, you can look at the big picture, what percentage of students are struggling or have strengths in certain areas. You can also look at individual student reports and see their actual scores for the different areas that I just described. So we can do that at the school level, at the class level, subgroups, or individually. And you can export to spreadsheets then too for analysis as well.
So, Gina, we're going to end with a question that we also asked Mary Whitehouse, and that's, what's one thing that you would like our listeners to know about the BIMAS?
I would like everyone to know that the BIMAS is a tool that should be used as a team. So when I say it's a tool, so that's kind of 2 things, I guess. But when I say it's a tool, it's not the end of the story, which is true for any data set. But I think especially when you look at things like social emotional learning and cognitive functioning, or whatever the category may be, you think, oh, that makes sense for this student. But we really need to dig deeper into that. It's a tool and it's one piece of the puzzle. And it's really important to have that team perspective when you're looking at a big data set like this, because I feel the BIMAS is very comprehensive and there's a lot to it. So it does take a team of professionals to look at this and other data. And then once you're using this as a tool appropriately, it gives you really valuable insight into school needs.
All right, Mellisa and I are back in the studio to wrap up. And to do so, I want to go back to the puzzle metaphor that we heard from Gina and that I kind of referenced in the front end. I mentioned that, I feel like before these interviews, I had an incomplete picture of the BIMAS specifically, and really behavioral data in general. Just a few scattered pieces, maybe 2 of the corner pieces, a few edges, but not a great sense of what else was going on. So I want to thank sincerely Mary Whitehouse and Gina Montague for filling in the puzzle for us. Yeah. Thank you also to Millbrook High School's Tremont Ponton for the theme music. And thank you to you listeners for joining us.
Until next time, bye.